Our school play was next week. I leaned against the edge of the bed, whispering to Mom. The teacher said everyone needs to wear white patent leather shoes on stage. Mom, can I get a pair too? Mom looked down at her phone, but she still smiled at me. Of course, sweetie. Mom will take you tomorrow. The next day, we went to the department store. I fell in love with a pair of white Mary Janes with little bows on the straps. The saleslady said they were over $200. Mom held the shoebox, her smile fading into a sudden, heavy silence. I quickly put the shoes back on the shelf and smiled at her, trying to make my voice sound bright. Actually, Mom, my sneakers are fine. I'm standing in the very back row anyway. No one will even see my feet. I knew why. To help Dad pay off his debts, Mom hadn't bought herself anything new in years, not even a pair of shoes. I had even started collecting soda cans from the park to recycle for extra cents. Mom looked at me, her eyes immediately welling up with tears. Just then, a woman standing nearby spoke up. How can a little girl go on stage without proper shoes? She walked over, took the box from the shelf, and handed it straight to the cashier. Here, sweetie. It's a gift from me. My eyes lit up, but I quickly sneaked a glance at Mom. Mom was standing frozen, all the color draining from her face. At the register, the woman smiled and slid a card across the counter. Don't worry about it. My husband makes money just so I can spend it. He won't mind a little thing like this. I stood on my tiptoes and saw the dark, matte finish of the black card. My heart sank. Only last night, I had seen that exact same card in Dad's wallet. Mom stood in front of the counter, unable to move. The woman's smile grew warmer, glowing with an easy, untroubled happiness. Once the baby in my belly is born, I'm going to dress her up like a princess too. I never want her to feel left out. Mom's breath seemed to catch in her throat. I froze too, my eyes dropping instinctively to the woman's round stomach. When Mom finally spoke, her voice was raspy, barely a whisper. You're pregnant? The woman nodded, her eyes shining with unmistakable joy. Just found out. I was just out doing some window shopping today. I can't wait to tell my husband tonight. It's going to be a surprise. Right then, a voice called out from behind us. What's taking so long? I turned around. A man was walking toward us, holding 2 iced drinks. I went entirely numb. It was Dad. But not the Dad I knew. The Dad who came home to us always wore worn-out, threadbare clothes. The man standing here looked like a movie star, polished and radiant. I stood there, my throat locking up. I didn't even dare to call out to him. The woman ran over to him, wrapping her arm tightly around his. Honey, you're just in time. I just did a good deed. She pointed at me, beaming. I bought a pair of recital shoes for this sweet little girl. She's so polite, she wouldn't even ask for them. Dad looked over in the direction she was pointing. The moment his eyes met mine and Mom's, his smile vanished completely. Mom immediately grabbed my hand, turning us around to leave. But as we walked, her hand was shaking so hard. When we got home, Mom placed those white Mary Janes on the table. She just stared at them for hours. Over the last few years, Mom had sold her earrings, her necklaces, everything, just to help Dad pay off his debts. The front door didn't open until very late. Dad walked in. He was still wearing his tailored suit, looking utterly out of place in our cramped, peeling apartment. He placed a large shopping bag on the table, calling my name as if nothing had happened. Maisie, look. Dad bought you some presents. I slowly stood up from the edge of the bed and looked inside the bag. They were toys and dresses I had wanted for a long time. But Dad had always said we couldn't afford them. Mom let out a bitter, mocking laugh, her eyes locked on him. Are you done lying to us? Dad frowned, looking exhausted, as if he simply didn't have the energy for a fight. The kid is right here. Don't start. Mom laughed again, but tears were streaming down her face. Oh, so now you care about the kid? She couldn't even have a pair of shoes for her school play because I couldn't afford them. Meanwhile, you have an entire other life out there. Another family. Dad's expression darkened. Watch your mouth. The apartment fell dead silent. I stood in the corner, barely daring to breathe. Mom's voice was quiet, but it hurt worse than hearing her scream. How could you do this to us? To your own daughter? Dad glanced at me, his posture stiffening with a momentary flicker of guilt. But then, his phone buzzed. He looked down, checked the screen, and immediately turned toward the door. As the door clicked shut behind him, Mom stood with her back to me for a very long time. I crept over and gently tugged at the hem of her shirt. Mom, was it because of the shoes? I shouldn't have asked for them. She spun around and pulled me into her arms, holding me so tight I could feel her chest heaving. No. Maisie, you did nothing wrong. She squeezed me, her voice trembling. It's Mom's fault. I'm so sorry. Listening to her, my own tears started to fall. I didn't really understand why I was crying, only that Mom was completely broken, and it made my chest ache. The next day, Mom walked me to school in total silence. Standing in the line with my classmates, I looked down at my new white shoes. Instead of happy, I just felt a heavy, sour lump in my throat. Just as rehearsals were wrapping up, the teacher suddenly called me into the front office. As I stood by the door, I could hear the administration staff whispering outside. That's her, right? The girl from the photos. So her mother is a homewrecker after all. My eyes stung with hot tears. I yelled back at them. My mom is not a bad person. Just as Mom rushed into the office and heard my shout, the water bottle she was holding slipped from her hand, crashing onto the tile floor. That was when I learned what had happened. The woman from the mall had somehow found her way into the school's parent Facebook group. She had posted the photos she took at the mall, along with a long, tearful message. She claimed she had only bought a pair of shoes out of the kindness of her heart for a poor little girl, only for my mother to start hounding her husband. She wrote that she was pregnant, that the stress was dangerous for her baby, and begged the other parents for support. She wrote it so beautifully, painting herself as the innocent, charitable victim. A few parents had initially questioned if there was some misunderstanding, but she knew exactly how to play them. With a few soft, manipulative replies, she dragged Mom's name through the mud. She didn't use outright insults, but every word implied that Mom was a cheap, scheming woman, and that I was a child being raised by trash. Slowly, the comments in the group turned vicious. Like mother, like daughter. I don't want my kid around someone like that. Disgusting. People like her deserve what's coming to them. Sitting in that office, I heard the murmurs from the hallway growing louder. These were grown-ups, yet the words coming out of their mouths were meaner than anything I'd ever heard on the playground. The teacher called Mom, and then she called Dad. I heard her speaking urgently into the receiver. The child is very distressed, and the parents outside are causing a scene. We need you to get here as soon as possible. Deep down, I kept hoping Dad would walk through that door. If he came, he could tell everyone that he was my dad. He could tell them Mom wasn't a bad person, and then all of this would go away. So I waited. But the first one to arrive was Mom. When she burst through the door, her hair was a mess, sweat beading on her forehead. The second she saw me, she fell to her knees and wrapped me in a tight hug. All the fear and hurt I'd been holding back poured out. I sobbed against her shoulder. Mom, I didn't hit anyone. They're saying bad things about you. They said I couldn't finish the sentence. Mom kept stroking my back, her hands frantic. It's okay, Maisie. Don't be scared. Mom is here. The teacher explained the situation, looking incredibly uncomfortable. She said the parents outside were too riled up, and suggested it might be best if I dropped out of the school play until things blew over. Mom's arms tightened around me instantly. Why? What did my daughter do wrong? The teacher sighed. Your daughter did nothing wrong. But the parents are crowding the hallway. If this escalates, it will only hurt her more. Indeed, there was a crowd outside the office glass. I heard someone shout, make her come out and explain herself. Another voice added, people like that shouldn't even be allowed to send their kids to this school. Mom was shaking with pure rage. She pulled out her phone and dialed Dad's number. She called again and again, until he finally picked up. Mom's voice cracked. You need to get to the school right now. I didn't know what he said on the other end, but the tiny flicker of hope in Mom's eyes died out. Maisie is being cornered and harassed at school. Just come. Just this once. If you don't show up, they are going to brand her as a bastard child. By the end, she was sobbing. But Dad still refused. Standing so close to her, I could hear his muffled voice through the speaker, handle it yourself. Stop calling me for every little thing. Then, the line went dead. Mom stood there, clutching the phone, completely frozen. In that moment, I finally understood. Dad was never coming. Seeing that he wasn't showing up, the crowd outside grew bolder, their words sharper. Someone pushed the office door open, pointing at my stage costume, telling us not to ruin the school's property. Terrified, I hid behind Mom. She shielded me with her body, but the hateful words still pierced through, sharp as needles. Who even knows if she has a father? Probably some random guy's kid she's trying to pin on someone else. Look at the mother. She looks like a home-wrecking siren. The apple doesn't fall far. My ears buzzed, and my vision blurred with endless tears. I wanted to scream at them that I had a dad. He just hadn't arrived yet. But even I didn't believe it anymore. Suddenly, someone grabbed my student file off the desk and opened it. The office dissolved into chaos. Everyone was crowding around, whispering, laughing, treating our lives like a cheap soap opera. I couldn't take it anymore. I screamed through my tears, I have a dad. Someone sneered. Then where is he? Call him here. In that split second, only one thought consumed my mind. I have to find Dad. If I find him, he has to acknowledge me. He can't pretend I don't exist. I shoved past the adults in front of me and bolted out the door. Mom screamed my name from behind, but I couldn't stop. I ran as fast as my small legs could carry me, tears blinding my way. The school gates were just ahead. Dad, please. Please just appear. But in the next second, a deafening screech of brakes tore through the air. I spun around instinctively. A car was barreling toward me, moving so fast. Before I could even register the danger, I was airborne. For a brief moment, I felt as light as a piece of paper drifting in the wind. Then, the impact. The pavement was so hard. The pain was suffocating, crushing the air right out of my lungs. I heard people screaming. And then I heard Mom's voice, a sound so broken it shattered the sky. Maisie. She threw herself over me, her hands trembling violently as she touched my face. I wanted to tell her how much it hurt. But when I opened my mouth, all I tasted was iron and blood. Mom's face grew blurry, fading into the gray light. The last thing I saw was her collapsing beside me, weeping so hard she couldn't even stand. By the time they lifted me into the ambulance, I had no strength left. The interior of the rig was blindingly bright. People were pressing down on my chest, shouting numbers, telling me to stay awake. But I was just so tired. Mom held my hand the entire time, gripping it so tightly, as if she believed that if she let go, I would slip away forever. She kept begging the paramedics. Please save her. Please, I beg you, save my daughter. I had never heard Mom sound like that. Even in our darkest times, she would always hold me and whisper, "It's okay, baby. Mom will figure something out." But this time, she had no solutions left. When we reached the hospital, they wheeled me into the trauma bay. The double doors swung shut, locking Mom outside. What happened next, I only learned later from the whispers of the living. Mom stood outside the operating room, and a nurse soon approached her with the intake and consent forms. They needed to run scans, prep for a blood transfusion, and start emergency surgery immediately. They needed a deposit. When Mom looked at the figure on the paper, her face went utterly pale. She dumped every single coin and crumpled bill from her purse, checked her banking app, and opened every loan app on her phone, one by one. But no matter how she scrambled, she was nowhere near enough. She messaged Dad, Maisie was hit by a car. She's in the hospital. Come now. His call came through seconds later. Mom gripped the phone like a dying woman clutching a lifeline, her voice cracking. Maisie's hurt. The doctors are trying to save her. I need $30,000 right now for the surgery. Please, just $30,000. But Dad didn't believe her. He thought it was another ploy. He accused her of using our daughter to scam him for money. Mom wept into the receiver. I'm not lying. She's truly dying. Just come to the hospital and see for yourself, I beg you. Still, he refused to believe her. He went so far as to say that if she really wanted the money, she needed to go and apologize to Natalie first. Because Natalie had been so distressed by the school drama that her stomach was cramping, and she wouldn't stop crying. The line went quiet for a long time. But finally, Mom whispered, okay. When she arrived at the private clinic, Natalie was lounging on a sofa, dabbing at her eyes, complaining that the day's fright had nearly cost her the baby. Dad stood beside her, stroking her hair, whispering sweet things as if the child in her womb was the only one that mattered in the world. Mom stood there and said, my daughter is in the operating room. Her voice didn't even sound like hers anymore. It was hollow, dry. But Dad only looked at her coldly. Apologize first. Natalie sniffled, her voice dripping with fake tears. It's all her fault. She caused a scene at the mall and at the school. She just won't let go of another woman's husband. Mom didn't defend herself. She just kept staring at Dad, waiting for some microscopic shred of humanity to show in his eyes. But there was nothing. Apologize, he repeated. Then you get the money. Mom stood there, looking like a ghost. She whispered one last time, my daughter is dying. Dad's face remained cast in stone. Apologize, and I'll wire the funds. So, Mom knelt. For me. She sank to her knees before that woman, lowering her head, and said she was sorry. But Natalie wasn't satisfied. Louder. Admit that you're the shameless one here. Mom's forehead was bruised, her hair tangled, but she forced the words out, syllable by syllable. I did nothing wrong. He is the one who sinned. Dad stood by, watching the entire spectacle without making a single move to stop it. Then Natalie sneered, bow down. Show some real remorse. Mom's shoulders trembled as if she were about to collapse. But she lowered her upper body, pressing her forehead directly to the cold floor. Once. Twice. 3 times. She did it with so much force that her forehead began to bleed. Only then did Dad toss a plastic card onto the floor in front of her. This is the last time, he said. Mom grabbed the card and ran. She ran back to the hospital, believing that if she could just run fast enough, I would still be waiting for her. But when she reached the billing counter, the clerk swiped the card several times, only to look up with a pitying sigh. I'm sorry, ma'am. This card has been frozen. Mom froze. She stood at the window, the useless card clutched in her hand, the blood on her forehead drying into a dark crust. Her face was completely devoid of life. And right then, the red light above the operating room went out. The doors swung open. A doctor wheeled out a small gurney, covered entirely by a white sheet. Mom looked as though she had been nailed to the floor. Her breath stopped. The card slipped from her fingers, clattering softly against the tile. But she didn't look down at it. She just stared at the gurney, her eyes wide, as if she believed that if she didn't blink, the doctor's words wouldn't be real. The doctor walked up to her, his voice heavy with quiet regret. I am so sorry. We did everything we could. Mom didn't move. She didn't seem to comprehend what those words meant. Floating above her head, I reached down, wanting to wrap my arms around her, to tell her not to be scared, that I was right here. But my hands passed straight through her shoulders. I couldn't touch a thing. The nurse gently pulled back the sheet, revealing my face. Only then did Mom seem to wake up. She stumbled forward, her knees giving out. I lay there so still, my face pale, my lips white, looking like I was just taking a nap. Mom's trembling fingers finally touched my hair. The next second, she collapsed to her knees. She didn't cry. I had never seen Mom this quiet. She gently stroked my cheek, her lips quivering, her voice so soft it felt like glass ready to shatter. Maisie. Mom is here. I brought the money, sweetie. Open your eyes and look at me, okay? Hearing her, a phantom sob caught in my throat. I wanted so badly to leap into her arms like I used to tell her I was right there. But I couldn't go back. Mom pulled my cold body into her arms, resting her forehead against my hand, whispering the same words over and over. I'm sorry. Mom was useless. I couldn't protect you. I hovered above her, shaking my head. No. That's not true, Mom. You tried so hard. She hadn't bought herself a single new thing in years just so I could eat. She always told me she didn't care about dressing up, but I knew she used to love pretty things. Whenever she made custard, she always gave me the softest, smoothest part in the middle. In the winter, even when her own hands were red and raw from the cold, she would always make sure my sleeves were pulled down tight to keep me warm. She had protected me so well. It was Dad who lied to her. It was those cruel people who hurt her. But she still took all the blame upon herself. Watching her, my heart felt like it was being torn to shreds. After a long time, the phone in Mom's pocket began to ring. She didn't answer it. The ringing went on and on. Only when the nurse gently nudged her did she seem to register the sound, slowly pulling the phone out. It was Dad. He probably thought she was calling to beg for more money. The moment the call connected, his voice was laced with deep irritation. Have you seriously not had enough of this drama? Mom held me close, saying nothing. Her eyes were empty, staring into nothingness. The doctor, unable to watch any longer, took the phone from her hand. Sir, this is the municipal hospital. The emergency resuscitation has failed. The child has passed away. Please come to the hospital immediately to handle the arrangements. The silence on the other end of the phone was not a pause, it was the sound of a foundation cracking open beneath a man's feet. The emergency physician, Dr. Ellis, did not repeat himself. In the county hospital trauma corridor, words were expensive, and he had none left to waste on. A father who had arrived too late for everything that mattered. He held the cheap plastic phone out at arm's length for 3 seconds, letting the mechanical hum of the dial tone fill the space, before pressing the red button and slipping the device back into Mom's jacket pocket. Mom didn't move. She was sitting on the green vinyl bench against the tiled wall, her hands curled over her knees. Her knuckles were split, crusted with the dried gray dust of the pavement where she had fallen beside my body, and across. The center of her forehead was a dark, purple contusion, the bloody stamp from where she had struck the marble floor of that private clinic 3 times. I drifted just above the strip lights. From up here, the world had lost its sharpness, everything looked as though it were being viewed through water. But I could see her clearly. I could see the way her shoulders weren't shaking anymore. When a person cries until their ribs ache, the body eventually runs out of water, and what remains is stone. Ma'am, the nurse said, her voice dropping into that careful, cushioned register they use for the ruined. We have to move her to the lower level now. You can't stay in the trauma bay. Mom didn't look at the nurse. She looked at the floor between her worn canvas shoes, right at the black corporate card Dad had thrown at her feet 20 minutes ago. It lay face down on the bleached linoleum, its matte finish scuffed by the wheels of passing gurneys. She wanted bows, Mom whispered. Her voice was flat, like paper sliding across wood. On the straps. Little white ones. Ma'am? I told her no, Mom said. She didn't look up. I told her we had to save for the gas bill. And then I let her go to school in sneakers with the soles coming loose. The nurse reached down, trying gently to hook an arm under Mom's elbow to help her up, but Mom didn't rise. She simply sat there, staring at the floor, until the heavy double doors at the end of the hall burst open with a violent, reverberating bang. It was Dad. He hadn't even taken off his tailored wool overcoat. His silk tie was askew, his hair disordered by the autumn wind outside, and his chest heaved as if he had Run up the stairwell instead of waiting for the elevator. For the first time in my life, I saw him looking terrified, not the cold, impatient man who slammed doors in our cramped living room, but a man who had suddenly realized the room he was standing in was on fire. He scanned the corridor, his eyes wild and bloodshot. When he saw Mom sitting alone on the bench, he froze. "Elena," he said, taking 2 stumbling steps forward. His voice was thin, caught between denial and demand. "Elena, stop this. Where is the doctor? Where did they take her? I know what you're doing. You got the hospital staff to call me. Because you wanted to scare me, right? Because of the card? The card had a security hold, that's all. It was an administrative error." Mom didn't move an inch. She didn't blink. She didn't even turn her neck to look at him. Dad's eyes darted past her toward the trauma room doors, which stood propped open now, revealing the stripped gurney, the clear plastic tubes tossed into the yellow biohazard bins, and the dark, wet towels piled in the corner. "Maisie," he called out. The name sounded foreign in his mouth. He hadn't said it with that kind of urgency since I was 4 years old and nearly tumbled off a swing set. "Maisie." He lunged toward the room, but Dr. Ellis stepped out from the chart station, blocking the doorway with his forearm. "Sir, you cannot go in there." "Where is my daughter?" Dad shouted, his hands grasping at the doctor's scrub top, twisting the cotton into tight knots. "Where is she?" "I'm her father. Tell me where she is." Dr. Ellis looked at him with an expression devoid of pity. "In a county hospital. Doctors see every variety of human failure, the reckless, the unlucky, the destitute. But the men who arrive in $1,000 suits after the child is already in the cold drawer are a specific kind of poison." "She's gone, sir," the doctor said, his voice entirely level. Time of death was 4:18 p.m. Severe thoracic trauma and internal exsanguination. If you had arrived with the funds for the transfusion protocol 40 minutes ago, her chances would still have been less than 10%. But you didn't. Dad's grip on the doctor's shirt slowly slipped. His fingers opened, trembling, until his arms fell limp against his sides. "No," Dad muttered. He shook his head violently, backing away until his spine hit the opposite wall. "No, she was just at rehearsal," Natalie said. Natalie said it was just a minor scrape outside the gate. A demonstration Elena staged it to ruin Natalie's reputation in the school district. Mom slowly lifted her head. For the first time since he had walked through the doors, she looked at him. There was no hatred in her eyes. Hatred requires fire, and Mom was completely frozen over. Her gaze was as empty as an open grave. "She ran into the street," Mom said. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. "Because the parents from your new wife's group were taking pictures of her face. They called her a bastard, Julian. They told her that her mother was a whore who stole other people's husbands." Dad choked on a breath. "Elena, I didn't know. She ran because she wanted to find you," Mom continued, her words rhythmic, measured, like nails being driven into timber. "She thought if she found you, you would tell them that she was your little girl. She thought you would protect her." Mom stood up. She didn't sway. She walked over to where the black card lay on the ground, bent down, and picked it up with 2 fingers. She didn't throw it. She didn't scream. She simply walked up to Dad, took his hand, pried his frozen fingers open, and pressed the plastic card into his palm. "She died while I was bowing my head to your mistress," Mom said softly. "The blood on my forehead is from her floor. Keep the card, Julian. You'll need it to buy our daughter a box." By midnight, the living world had begun to tear itself apart over the carcass of what had happened. I stayed near Mom. A spirit tethered by grief doesn't feel cold or fatigue, but I felt the dragging weight of her thoughts. When she went back to our apartment, she didn't turn on the lights. She sat on the small wooden stool by the kitchen counter, holding my school backpack against her chest. Inside were my colored pencils, half a roll of strawberry candies, and the rehearsal script for the play. Meanwhile, 3 miles away in a high-rise condominium with panoramic glass walls overlooking the river, Natalie was pacing across an Italian wool rug, her phone glued to her ear. "Delete the post," she was screaming into the receiver. "Why can't you just take it down? I'm the administrator of the group." The screen of her tablet was glowing on the coffee table, illuminating dozens of notifications that were flashing like warning beacons. The school parent group had leaked. The internet does not care about private rivalries until blood is drawn, and once blood is drawn, it becomes a ravenous machine. A parent who had been standing in the hallway during the confrontation had recorded a 7-second Video of mom kneeling on the office floor, shielding me while 3 women thrust their phones into our faces. Another student had captured the sound of the screeching tires outside the gate, followed by mom's inhuman scream. Someone had matched the screenshots of Natalie's tearful, manipulative post, where she had boasted about her charity and hinted that mom was an extortionist, with the police report of a fatal hit-and-run involving a 7-year-old girl. The comments under Natalie's original post were no longer supportive. User 4829, wait, the child died? You organized a mob to harass a 7-year-old over a pair of shoes? Claire_M, you said the mother was stalking your husband. But Julian Vance is listed as the biological father on the girl's school registration from 3 years ago. You're the other woman. Local observer, look at her profile. She's flaunting trips to Dubai while her husband's legal wife was using government food assistance to feed his first child. This is sickening. Natalie threw her phone against the sofa cushions. Her face was mottled with red patches, her manicured nails digging into her palms. It's not my fault, she muttered to the empty room, her chest rising and falling in shallow, erratic gasps. She shouldn't have run into the street. The driver is the one who hit her. How was I supposed to know the kid was that fragile? The front door clicked open. Dad walked in. He had not taken off his coat. His shoes were tracked with hospital grime, and his eyes were hollowed out, dark caverns in his skull. Natalie turned on him immediately, weaponizing her panic before he could speak. Julian. Where have you been? Do you have any idea what's happening online? People are threatening my clinic. They found my private account. You have to call your legal team right now. Get an injunction. Sue the school board for leaking the parent list. Dad didn't answer. He walked past her as if she were made of mist, heading straight for the wet bar in the corner. He reached for a crystal decanter, his hand shaking so violently that the glass neck clinked against the tumbler, spilling amber liquid across the marble counter. Julian. Natalie snapped, marching over and grabbing his arm. Are you listening to me? The stress is bad for the baby. My doctor said. Dad jerked his arm away with such sudden, savage force that Natalie stumbled backward, catching herself against the back of the sofa. Don't talk about the baby, Dad rasped. It was the first time he had ever raised his voice to her. His throat sounded torn, like he had swallowed broken glass. Natalie blinked, stunned. Her eyes instantly filled with practiced, luminous tears. How can you say that? This is your child. What happened to Maisie was a tragedy, an accident, but you can't blame me for the card, Dad interrupted, turning around to face her. His eyes were wild, fixed on her stomach with an expression that looked terrifyingly close to revulsion. Why did you call the bank to freeze the auxiliary accounts this morning? Natalie's breath hitched. She pulled her silk robe tighter around herself. I saw a suspicious charge from the downtown district. I thought someone had skimmed the numbers. You told me we needed to be careful with liquid assets while the corporate audit was ongoing. It was $30,000, Dad said. He stepped closer to her, his voice dropping into a terrifying, dead monotone. 30,000. You knew Elena was trying to clear the hospital intake. You were sitting on that sofa, watching me make her hit her head against the floor, knowing that the card in my pocket wouldn't clear a single cent. I didn't know she was really hurt. Natalie shrieked, her voice turning shrill and sharp. Elena has lied for 3 years. She told everyone you abandoned them when you were the one who built this company. She used that kid as a bargaining chip every single month to squeeze money out of you. She was my daughter, Dad said. And this one is your son. Natalie screamed back, slapping her own abdomen. A living child. A child with a future. Are you going to throw away everything we built for a dead girl who wasn't even smart enough to look both ways before crossing the street? The slap was so loud it seemed to ring against the high ceilings. Natalie fell back onto the sofa, her hand pressed against her reddening cheek, her eyes wide with total, unadulterated shock. Dad stood over her, his hands still raised, his chest heaving. He looked down at his own palm, then at Natalie, looking horrified by what he had done, but even more horrified by the realization of what he had chosen over his own flesh and blood. Get out, Dad whispered. What? Get out of this apartment, he said, turning his back on her and collapsing onto a stool by the window. Take your bags. Go to a hotel. If I look at your face right now, I will kill you. Grief in a small apartment smells like burning wax and unwashed laundry. On the 3rd day after I died, 2 men in dark gray suits knocked on Mom's door. They weren't from the school, and they weren't Dad's friends. They carried heavy leather briefcases and wore the quiet, sharp demeanor of federal forensic accountants. Behind them stood an older woman named Eleanor Vance, my grandmother, Dad's mother, whom I had only seen once when I was very small. She had disowned Dad 5 years ago when he began his corporate maneuvers to strip Mom of her legal rights. Grandmother didn't knock politely. She pushed the door open, walked straight to where Mom was sitting on the floor by my bed, and dropped to her knees without caring about the dust on her tailored skirt. She didn't offer empty condolences. She took Mom's cold hands in her wrinkled ones and pressed them against her own face. Elena, the old woman said, her voice shaking with an ancient, bitter fury. The funeral is arranged. The plot is next to my father's in the North Garden. But before we put that baby in the ground, you are going to sign these authorizations. Mom looked up, her eyes vacant. I don't want his money, Eleanor. I don't want anything that touched his hands. It isn't his money, Grandmother said, her voice turning sharp as an iron blade. It's yours. And what he stole from you to feed that creature in the high-rise is going to be used to dismantle him until he has nothing left to his name but the clothes on his back. The two accountants set their briefcases on the small dining table, the same table where Dad had placed the toys he bought to soothe his own conscience 3 days before I died. The story of Dad's debts was not complicated, it was simply monstrous. 4 years ago, when his logistics firm began to yield massive returns, Dad did not want to share the equity in a potential divorce. Advised by an unscrupulous asset protection lawyer, he created a network of secondary shell corporations in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. He deliberately defaulted on artificial loans between his own entities, creating a false paper trail of catastrophic personal debt. To make the fiction convincing for the courts, he made his own family live the lie. He told Mom the collectors were threatening his life. He watched her sell her grandmother's gold earrings, her wedding ring, and the modest life insurance policy her father had left her. He watched her measure out baby formula with a teaspoon to make the can last 3 days longer. He watched her walk 3 miles in the freezing rain to save bus fare, while every dollar she handed over to save him was funneled into a private trust that purchased the penthouse on River Road under Natalie's maiden name. He had not abandoned us out of neglect, he had systematically starved us out of greed, keeping Mom too exhausted, poor, and desperate to ever hire an attorney to audit his books. The frozen card, one of the accountants said, adjusting his glasses as he flipped through a ledger. It wasn't an accident. Natalie had secondary power of attorney over that specific operational account. She set an automated trigger to lock the funds if any single transaction exceeded $10,000 from a municipal hospital terminal. She knew Mrs. Vance was at the emergency room. Mom sat very still. The empty look in her eyes began to change. It was like watching cold gray steel heat up in a furnace until it turned white. She knew? Mom asked. Her voice wasn't loud, but the air in the room suddenly felt thin. She received 3 text confirmations from the hospital's automated pre-authorization system between 3:45 p.m. and 4:05 p.m., the accountant replied, sliding 3 printed logs across the table. She declined each authorization manually from her smartphone while sitting in the waiting area of the clinic. Mom picked up the papers. She looked at the timestamps. 3:47 p.m., Emergency Trauma Center, request for pediatric blood unit reservation. $8,500. Status, declined by user. 3:54 p.m., Emergency Surgical Suite 4, anesthesia and thoracic tray prep, $12,000. Status, declined by user. 4:02 p.m., ICU pediatric bed hold and extracorporeal support setup, $9,500. Status, declined by user. I remembered that time. At 4:02 p.m., I was hovering near the ceiling of the trauma bay, watching 4 nurses take turns pressing down on my chest, their arms shaking with exhaustion. One of them, a young girl with freckles, was crying while she pumped the manual oxygen bag. She's so small, the nurse had whispered. Please, baby, just give us one rhythm. While they were breaking their backs trying to keep my heart beating, Natalie's thumb had slid across a glass screen 3 miles away, pressing decline. Mom didn't tear the papers. She folded them carefully, corner to corner, with precise, geometric symmetry. She stood up, walked over to the kitchen sink, washed her face with cold water, and wiped the dried blood from her forehead until the skin was raw and pink. Give me the pen, Eleanor, Mom said. Elena, Grandmother said softly. This will ruin him entirely. He will go to federal prison for bankruptcy fraud. Mom took the heavy gold pen from Grandmother's hand. I don't care if he goes to prison, Mom said, her signature scratching across the bottom of the legal forms with steady, unbroken lines. I want him to live a Very long life, and I want him to remember the price of those shoes every time he takes a breath. The funeral was held on a Tuesday morning. It was cold, the kind of autumn day where the sky looks like an unpolished sheet of zinc. The school had tried to send flowers, a massive, expensive wreath of white lilies, with a silk ribbon that read, "In deepest sympathy from the Board of Education." Mom had the cemetery staff throw it into the dumpster behind the crematorium before the service even began. The parents who had stood in the office corridor, the ones who had pointed their phones at my face and called me names, did not come. But their husbands did, sent as cowards to deliver formal settlement offers from their private insurance policies, hoping to avoid the civil wrongful death lawsuits that Eleanor's attorneys had filed at dawn. Mom did not speak to a single one of them. She wore a simple black coat that was 5 years old, her hair pulled back into a tight bun. She looked smaller than she used to, but when she walked past the rows of polished black cars, the men in their dark coats lowered their heads, unable to look her in the eye. Dad came, too. He stood 20 paces back, near the iron fence of the cemetery, looking like a vagrant who had stolen a dead man's suit. He hadn't shaved in days, his collar was dirty, and his eyes were bloodshot and sunken. He did not dare to step on the grass of the plot. When the small white casket was lowered into the earth, I sat on top of the headstone, swinging my ghost feet over the fresh-cut granite. Maisie Vance, it read. 7 years old. An angel who walked among wolves. As the first handful of dry soil hit the wood, Dad fell to his knees on the gravel path. He didn't make a loud sound, he made a strange, wet choking noise, his hands clawing into the sharp stones until his fingernails tore. Mom walked past him on her way out. She didn't pause. "Elena," he gasped, his fingers reaching out to touch the hem of her coat as she passed. "Elena, please, let me pay for the stone. Let me do this one thing." Mom stopped, but she didn't look down at him. "You already paid for it, Julian," she said, her voice clear and carrying across the quiet cemetery. "You paid for it with 30 pieces of silver and a pair of white shoes." That evening, the first investigative report was broadcast on the city's evening news. The media did not treat it as a sad family dispute with Eleanor's lawyers feeding the press unsealed court filings, bank logs, and the school surveillance footage. The story exploded into a national scandal about corporate sociopathy and cyber harassment. The footage of the office was played on high-definition television across the country. The camera showed Natalie entering the school 3 hours before the accident, handing printed copies of her social media posts to the PDA representatives. It showed her smiling, laughing with 2 other mothers, pointing toward my classroom. Then it showed the hallway. It showed me, a 7-year-old child wearing a faded cotton shirt and new white shoes, being surrounded by 4 adult women who blocked the exit to the main foyer. It showed one woman grabbing my shoulder to turn me toward a camera lens. It showed me shaking, dropping my water bottle, and then bolting toward the glass doors in sheer, blind terror. The driver of the car, an elderly man who had been traveling within the speed limit, had already been cleared of criminal charges. His dashcam footage was released alongside the school's. It showed me running through the hedge, crying so hard my hands were over my eyes, stumbling onto the asphalt 2 seconds before the impact. Public sentiment is an unpredictable current, but when it turns toward the defense of a dead child, it becomes a tidal wave that levels everything in its path. Within 48 hours, the private aesthetic clinic where Natalie was a partner was vandalized with red paint. By the 3rd day, the building owner terminated her commercial lease to prevent further riots. Her private social media accounts were systematically archived and exposed by online groups. Every picture of her holding expensive handbags, every caption about her blessed life, was juxtaposed against the bank logs showing the 3 medical declines while I was dying in the trauma room. The other parents involved in the hallway confrontation were suspended from their corporate executive positions pending internal reviews. One of them, the wife of a prominent real estate developer, was forced to issue a public televised apology through her legal counsel, her voice shaking as she read a prepared statement while protesters screamed murderer outside the courthouse gates. Natalie tried to flee. She booked a first-class ticket to Geneva under her maiden name, carrying 3 hard-shell suitcases packed with designer jewelry, foreign currency, and high-end watches she had liquidated from Dad's personal safes. She didn't make it past the security checkpoint at Terminal 2. I followed the wind that blew through the high glass arches of the international airport. Natalie was wearing an oversized cashmere coat, dark sunglasses that covered half her face, and a silk scarf wrapped around her head like an old-fashioned movie star trying to avoid the paparazzi. She kept her head down, her hand resting instinctively over her stomach, which was barely showing beneath the thick wool. Boarding pass and passport, please, the customs officer said. Natalie slid the documents across the stainless steel counter, her hand trembling slightly. It's an emergency flight. Family medical issue. The officer scanned the passport. The screen blinked red. A soft, double chime sounded from beneath the desk. Ma'am, please step to the side for secondary inspection. What? Natalie's voice shot up an octave. No, my flight boards in 15 minutes. I have a priority boarding pass. Two armed Port Authority officers stepped out from the security alcove behind her. They didn't ask questions. One of them took her rolling carry-on, while the other gestured toward the small, windowless interrogation room behind the glass partition. Natalie Croft, the officer asked. Yes, but I haven't done anything wrong. My lawyer said the civil subpoenas don't restrict international travel. This isn't a civil subpoena, Ms. Croft, a man in a plain dark suit said, stepping out from the private room. He held a leather folder containing a federal warrant. I'm Special Agent Miller from the Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division. You are being placed under arrest for conspiracy to commit bankruptcy fraud, wire fraud, and the interstate transportation of stolen property. Natalie backed away until her shoulders hit the metal railing of the queue. Stolen property? What's stolen property? Everything in those bags belongs to my partner. Mr. Julian Vance's personal and corporate assets were placed under an emergency federal freeze at 9 a.m. yesterday morning pursuant to an ex parte petition filed by the majority shareholder of Vance Logistics, his mother, Eleanor Vance. The agent explained calmly. The luxury goods and currency in your possession were purchased using funds redirected from accounts that are currently subject to a criminal forfeiture order. This is a mistake, she cried, looking around wildly at the passengers who had stopped in line, many of them already pulling out their phones to film the scene. Julian. Call Julian. He'll tell you. Mr. Vance was taken into custody 2 hours ago at his residence, the agent said. The color drained from Natalie's face with terrifying speed. She looked at the crowd of travelers watching her. She saw a young mother holding a little girl's hand, the child wearing a bright yellow raincoat with cartoon ducks on the pockets. For a second, Natalie looked down at the floor, and in that brief, unguarded moment, I saw the first sliver of true terror in her eyes, not the fear of losing money, but the cold, creeping realization that the world she had built by stepping on my mother's neck was completely gone. I'm pregnant, she whispered, her voice cracking as the female officer took her arms and pulled them behind her back. You can't do this to me. I'm carrying his child. A medical team will evaluate you at the detention facility, ma'am, the officer said, clicking the cold steel cuffs around her wrists with a sharp, metallic snap. As they led her through the terminal, her silk scarf slipped from her head, dragging across the dirty floor where hundreds of commuters had walked. People pointed. Someone shouted her name from the upper mezzanine, followed by a curse that echoed through the vast terminal. I hovered above the departure board, watching her disappear behind the heavy security doors. There was no joy in watching it. When you are dead, you do not feel the warm, satisfying rush of revenge that living people write about in books. You only see the ugly, pathetic machinery of people who thought they were gods discovering that they are made of cheap clay. Federal holding cells do not look like the ones in the movies. They are clean, painted in institutional beige, and lit by fluorescent tubes that hum with a low, maddening vibration 24 hours a day. Dad sat at the metal table in the interview room, wearing an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too large for his frame. His tailored suits, his handmade Italian leather shoes, his platinum watch, everything had been stripped away and catalogued into brown paper evidence bags. Across from him sat Eleanor Vance and her chief legal counsel, Arthur Davies. The plea agreement is on the table, Julian, Davies said, sliding a thick document across the steel surface. If you cooperate with the forensic audit and surrender all rights to the offshore trusts, the prosecution will recommend a sentence of 8 to 10 years at a low-security facility. If you go to trial, you are facing 25 years without parole. Dad didn't look at the document. He looked at his mother. Where is Elena? He asked. His voice was barely audible over the hum of the air. Vance. Elena is not your wife anymore, grandmother replied coldly. The annulment petition was granted this morning on the grounds of criminal fraud and concealment. She doesn't have to see you, speak to you, or acknowledge your existence for the rest of her life. Dad flinched as if he had been struck with a whip. She's taking everything? He asked. There is nothing left to take, grandmother said. The company will be restructured. The profits from your liquidated shares are being placed into an irrevocable charitable trust under Maisie's name to fund pediatric trauma units. and provide legal aid for mothers facing economic abuse. Dad looked down at his cuffed hands, his thumbs running over the bare skin where his wedding ring used to sit. Natalie's baby. He whispered. Is it mine? Grandmother leaned forward, her silver hair catching the harsh light of the ceiling tubes. Her face was an unreadable mask of aristocratic disdain. Does it matter? She asked. Natalie Croft entered a guilty plea an hour ago in exchange for medical confinement at a state correctional facility. She signed away all parental rights to any future claims against the Vance estate. When that child is born, it will be placed with an adoptive family 3 states away. It will never know your name. It will never know hers. Dad's head dropped onto the cold metal table. He didn't scream. He didn't curse. He simply began to weep, his shoulders shaking with a violent, rhythmic tremor, the sound of his forehead bumping against the steel sounding hideously similar to the noise Mom had made on the floor of that private clinic. She asked for shoes, he sobbed, the words muffled by his own arms. $200. I had $3 million in the Zurich account that morning. $3 million, and I let her die for $200. Grandmother stood up. She smoothed the front of her dark wool skirt, picked up her leather handbag, and tapped the heavy wooden door for the guard to let her out. She didn't look back at him. You didn't let her die for $200, Julian, she said as the lock clicked open. You let her die because you were already dead inside. You just hadn't noticed the smell yet. 6 months later, the spring came back to the city. The world moves on with an almost cruel indifference to the dead. The grass grew thick and green over my small plot in the north garden, covering the raw scars in the earth until the ground looked smooth and soft again. Mom had moved out of our peeling apartment. She lived in a small, bright house near the coast, far away from the gray concrete of the school district and the cold glass high-rises by the river. The house had a small porch with wooden wind chimes that tinkled whenever the ocean breeze came through the trees. She worked now at the foundation that bore my name. Every day, she sat in a sunny office, reviewing grant applications from hospitals that needed pediatric monitoring equipment, and writing checks for mothers who couldn't afford the legal fees to protect their children from wealthy, violent men. She looked different. Her hair had grown out, falling over her shoulders in soft, dark waves. She wore a simple white linen shirt, and the deep, hollow bruises beneath her eyes had faded into soft, quiet lines of remembrance. She did not smile often, but when she did, it was not the tight, terrified smile she used to give me when the bills arrived in the mail. It was a gentle, quiet thing, like morning light coming through a window. On a Saturday afternoon, she walked down to the rocky beach near her house. In her hands, she carried a small shoebox wrapped in plain brown paper. I walked beside her, my small spirit feet leaving no prints in the wet sand, my hand resting against the cotton of her sleeve. She couldn't see me, but whenever the wind blew across her cheek, she would pause, lift her face toward the sky, and take a deep, slow breath, as if she could feel the faint, warm brush of my fingers against her skin. She sat on a piece of smooth driftwood near the water's edge and untied the twine around the box. Inside was a pair of white patent leather Mary Janes. They were not the ones Natalie had bought with Dad's blood-soaked card, those had been thrown into the incinerator along with the hospital sheets. These were new. Mom had bought them with the first paycheck she earned from her own work. They had tiny white bows on the straps, perfectly stitched, with little silver buckles that caught the afternoon sun. Mom didn't cry. She took the shoes out of the box, placed them side by side on the clean, white sand just above the tide line, and sat with her arms wrapped around her knees, watching the small waves roll in. I found them, Maisie, she whispered to the ocean. The ones you liked. The water surged forward, clear and cold, foaming around the soles of the shoes. I sat down on the sand next to her, slipping my phantom feet into the leather. They fit perfectly. They were soft, light, and didn't hurt my heels at all. They're beautiful, Mom, I told her, leaning my head against her shoulder. Look at me. I'm standing in the front row now. Mom closed her eyes. A single tear slipped down her cheek, clear and bright in the sunlight, but she didn't wipe it away. She simply smiled, a small, true smile that reached all the way to her eyes. Go on and dance, sweetie, she whispered into the wind. Mom is watching. The tide came up higher, lifting the small white shoes into the current, carrying them out toward the deep, blue expanse of the sea, where nothing could ever touch them, break them, or take them away again. And for the first time since the screech of the brakes outside the school gate, I turned toward the bright, warm horizon, took a running leap into the air, and let the light carry me home.